Law of High Magic is a law almost entirely focused on offensive spells. 5 out of the 6 castable spells are focused on dealing damage to enemies or buffing your own units to increase their own damage output, with only 1 castable and the passive left to consider self-preservation. This makes it into a great law when you're heading into a fight you're already going to win, as the added pressure can quickly turn the tide more dominantly into your favour. As for the factions that can use this law, looking at the High Elves, the Lizard Men, and the Wood Elves. First up we have the passive of the law, and this is Shield of Sapphire. This affects allied units map-wide and grants them 10% damage resistance for 9 seconds. As I say every single time, this is a passive, so rather than focusing on casting spells to make the most of this, you want to use them in the best case scenario for them and just have this as an added bonus. That being said, if you can hold your fire until most of your units are in combat or taking damage, then you'll be getting some great value in the form of that damage reduction for every single unit in your army. 10% isn't much, but it is 10% of all damage tossed at your army, so you can be blocking hundreds or thousands of damage depending on what you're up against. As passives go, that's not half bad at all. First castable spell is Hand of Glory. It's an augment spell, costs 4 winds of magic, and has a 28-second cooldown. It can be targeted on allied units and has a 200 meter cast range. The affected unit gains 24 melee attack and 40 reload skill for 29 seconds. This is a massive buff for such a cheap spell. 24 melee attack can send units from mindless halfwits who can't hit the broadside of a barn to precision assassins who land almost every single swing they take. Now this isn't going to increase their damage per swing, but it will increase the number that land, so it's technically a damage increase, but the type and quantity of damage per swing isn't going to change. Of course you can also use it on missile units to increase their reload skill massively, which of course increases their firing rate and therefore their damage output, but again the type of damage isn't going to change or increase. Use this on the most elite units you have, either on the front lines or the back lines, just choose whatever has the potential to do the most damage and set them loose. The Overcast increases the cost to 6 winds of magic and increases the reload skill to plus 60. This of course only wants to be used on missile units, as anything that can't shoot won't get much value from the added reload skill. Just focus this on the most elite ranged units you have that can get damage off easily and watch them fire. Nothing more to it than that, just drop the cast and keep them safe for the full duration so they can make full use of that massive buff. Apotheosis is a regeneration spell, costs 5 winds of magic and has a 29-second cooldown. It can only be targeted on allied units and has a 200 meter cast range. It restores up to 480 HP and allows the target to cause fear for that 10-second duration. Of course, the primary use of this spell is for the regeneration, since that fear isn't really going to do much in the 10 seconds, unless it's against something on the brink of breaking anyway. 480 HP also isn't really a ton of regeneration, but at the end of the day, it costs 5 winds of magic, so it could be worse. You of course want to use this on your units that are starting to run low on HP, but I would say nothing in the final quarter of their HP bar, since chances are this won't stop them from retreating and will buy them seconds at best. Whereas if you use this on units at half HP, they're going to get that boost and keep fighting that little bit longer before starting to break. You can also use this spell at the end of battles to regen your units and save them some time on the campaign map, but since you can't resurrect dead troops, the value of doing this can only go so far. Overall, this spell isn't really the most impactful, and that might just be the vampire count simping me talking, but that's just how I feel. The Overcast increases the cost to 7 winds of magic and increases the cast range to 600 meters. It's the exact spell in every other way, but now you can cast it from really far away. If you want to heal something and can't get close to them, then use this. That's pretty much it. Soul Quench is a magic missile spell, costs 7 winds of magic and has a 43-second cooldown. It can only be targeted on enemy units and has a 250 meter cast range. It deals moderate magical damage and has a powerful explosion, which makes it strong versus multiple entities. Pretty straightforward how you want to use this one, since most magic missiles do perform pretty much the same. This one likes to go against multiple entity units to make the most of that powerful explosion, so aim this at multiple entity units, maybe one in a clump of other units, and watch the damage rack up. As with all other spells like this, you want to make sure you have a clear line of sight between your caster and the target, so a high angle is preferable to make sure no damage is lost by hitting the ground or other units on the way. Of course, also be careful when targeting enemies in combat with your own units, as that explosion can hit them just as easily if you aren't careful. The Overcast increases the cost to 11 winds of magic and increases the damage. Pretty much the same spell, just with more damage. If the original cast isn't going to get through their HP or armor, then chances are this will. Aside from that one difference, everything else about how to use it and what to use it on is exactly the same. Tempest is next up, and it's a vortex spell, costs 8 winds of magic and has a 44-second cooldown. It can only be targeted on enemy flying units and has a 150 meter cast range. It deals major magical damage in a huge randomly moving area of effect, which is of course strong versus flying, and in particular strong versus single combatants. It also hits the target with minus 60% speed for 22 seconds, and the damage lasts for 11 seconds. With most vortex spells, I would say using them as a gamble, since they are just as likely to move away from your enemies or towards your own units as they are to hit their intended target. This one is different in only one way. Instead of focusing on ground-based units, it instead is most effective versus flying units and single entity flying units at that. You can cast it directly on them so the initial damage is guaranteed, then the random movement kicks in, of course alongside the enemy being able to move since they are flying, and the further they are from the centre, the less damage it does. The speed affects them for that full 22-second duration though, so if you want to combo this with some missile units, then go right ahead. This is honestly a really strange spell since it can't hit your own units at all and doesn't affect anything on the ground. To get the most out of it, target into a clump of enemy flying units so you hit as many of them as possible, and back it up with some missiles to make the most of that slowing effect. Try sending in a flying unit of your own to clump them up, but just be aware that they might get pinned down and taken out before you can finish off the enemy. The overcast increases the cost to 12 winds of magic, and the duration to 22 seconds. That double duration means double the damage, in theory, as long as the target stays close to the centre of the cast. Use it pretty much the same when the base cast isn't cutting it for damage, as everything else is just about the same. Fiery Convocation is a wind spell, costs 15 winds of magic, and has a 52-second cooldown. It can all be targeted on the ground and has a 150 meter cast range. It causes major magical and fire damage in a medium forward moving area of effect, which is strong versus armor and multiple entities, and weak versus single. It also has a 10-second duration. This is of course best used against a long line of enemy units that aren't going to move anywhere. The major magical and fire damage is going to rip through pretty much whatever you aim it at, so make sure you choose the meatiest targets you can to make the most of it. I like to use wind spells once the lines have clashed and the enemy has set up and isn't moving anywhere. This gives me the best chance that nothing is going to move and avoid the damage that's being dropped on them. Of course, you just want to be careful not to aim it at your own troops too, as this damage doesn't care what it's hitting as long as it hits hard. As long as you do all this, you should get some great value. The overcast increases the cost to 22 winds of magic and increases the armor piercing damage. This of course wants to be used when you're up against the toughest enemy units to punch through their defenses and deal the maximum amount of damage possible. Other than the increase in damage, you want to use it the exact same and target units stood in a big long line that aren't going to move anywhere, and of course avoid torching your own troops while you're at it. Our final spell is Arcane Unforging. This is a direct damage spell, costs 16 winds of magic and has a 52-second cooldown. It can only be targeted directly on enemy units and has a 100 meter cast range. The damage is strong versus single combatants and weak versus multiple, as there is a chance that the target will resist damage. It also has 30 seconds to the ability recharge of the target unit, and the damage lasts for 22 seconds. Of course, this wants to be used against single targets, but specifically lords and heroes with abilities to get the max value out of those effects. The direct damage will of course go through any defenses they have and chip away at even the toughest of enemy units. That ability recharge time increase will prevent enemy units from using abilities and spells for a short time and can give you the time you need to focus them down before they can use anything, which can of course save you a lot of hassle. Of course you can also use this spell on any single entity that's causing you trouble, but unless they have abilities, you're going to be leaving some value on the table. The overcast increases the cost to 20 winds of magic and increases the ability recharge time to 45 seconds. This of course means you want to exclusively use this spell on enemy lords and heroes or other units with abilities you want to prevent them from using. The damage doesn't change, so anything else can go with the base spell, but if you're up against a powerful caster, then this is the spell you need to stop their casting and give you a chance to focus them down before they can cause you any more trouble. And that concludes this guide on the lore of high magic. Let me know what you thought of this lore in the comments below. Let me know what you thought of this video by leaving a like or a dislike, and if you want to see more content like this, then be sure to subscribe to the channel so you never miss a video. If you're feeling especially big penis, you can become a supporter of the channel either by joining the membership system here on YouTube or by becoming a patron over on the Patreon. Doing so gets you shoutouts at the end of videos, as well as early behind the scenes access and voting power on future content. I'd like to thank Henry Tucker for his support at the Officers tier, and of course every other single supporter for all their support at every tier. One more thank you for watching, and for now, I've been COLONELDAMNEDERS, and I will see you next turn.